Good evening from our headquarters in Kyiv. This is the Sunday show on Hromadske International, the only primetime TV program explaining the Eastern European geopolitical storm in English, and I am Natalia Hromadske. And that's what we have prepared for you tonight. Nadiya Savchenko, a war hero and an Ukrainian MP who spent 2 years in prison in Russia, has been arrested and accused of plotting a terrorist attack. We take a look at the case. Ukraine's top English-language newspaper, Kyiv Post, sold to controversial Odessa multimillionaire. What does its editor-in-chief say? OSCE responsible for media freedoms on journalists detained by Russia and how the fight against fake news may be misused. Prominent Russian author Mikhail Zygar on what to expect from Vladimir Putin's fourth term and the strategy of Russian opposition. Ukraine President Poroshenko had been heavily criticized for owning a candy factory in Russia. It had been shut down, but what happened to it? Our own report from the town of Lipetsk. Nadiya Savchenko, a war hero, a former pilot, and a Ukrainian MP who spent 2 years in prison in Russia, is arrested and accused of attempting to overthrow the country's constitutional order, threatening the life of the president of Ukraine, preparing a terrorist attack, and promoting the activities of a terrorist organization, as well as illegal arms possession. The Prosecutor General's office claims that Savchenko conspired with a number of other people, in particular the head of the Officers' Corps, Volodymyr Ruban, the person known for the swap of the prisoners with DPR and LNR, and several officers from the 8th Regiment of the Special Operation Forces of the Ukrainian Army. It was these officers who passed on the MP's plans to Ukrainian Security Service, SBU, continuing to work on its implementation under the SBU's supervision. We have with us Anton Pechenkin, a political analyst, and Maria Tomak, a human rights activist who deals with prisoners in particular and followed Savchenko's destiny. But before we start the discussion, I suggest we watch our report on the last day of Savchenko in the parliament.
It's 7 a.m. in the morning. Nadiya Savchenko leaves her apartment in Troyeshina residential area. On the way, Nadiya and her sister Vera stop to buy some pomegranates.
We should buy some pomegranates on the way. Yes, we have to. We should open the window and say, where can we buy some grenades here? Everybody will freak out. Savchenko came to the Troyeshina market to buy grenades.
People will give us actual grenades.
They will say, girls, we will give you this as a bonus.
How many would you like? Around 30.
How many?
30, yes.
As a result, the deputy is late for the regulatory committee meeting, where it will be decided whether to recommend the parliament to strip Savchenko of her parliamentary immunity and whether to allow her detention and arrest. The General Prosecutor of Ukraine, Yuri Lutsenko, is also at this meeting, as well as the prosecutor in the case of Volodymyr Ruban, a swap negotiator and an alleged accomplice of Savchenko.
I suggest we listen to the explanations of lawmaker Nadiya Viktorovna Savchenko if she makes it to this meeting. Oh, she is here already. Nadiya Viktorovna, please take a seat. We have only started, so you haven't missed anything. According to the official investigation in 2017, Mr. Ruban conspired with lawmaker Savchenko in plans to overthrow the country's constitutional order and seize the state power in Ukraine. In the video recording, first Ruban and then Savchenko revealed their plans to overthrow the constitutional system by carrying out a terrorist attack in the Kyiv government quarter and inside the Verkhovna Rada building, using mortars and weapons received from the DPR separatists. All this is recorded on audio and video recording devices planted with the court permission. The fact that Savchenko was in this car is recorded. Today, the fact that Savchenko took part in this conversation will be demonstrated at Verkhovna Rada Hall. The video was partly made public by the SBU. Her voice was changed because the deputy was abroad and we wanted her to make it back home safely.
In reality, there aren't so many accusations, Savchenko replies. She confirms the veracity of the conversations in the military 8th Special Forces Regiment, which would later be demonstrated in a video. But the facts presented in these talks are distorted, she says.
All of you are concerned whether I had any grenades in my handbag. Yes, I had the pomegranates. And here they are.
In principle, you don't have any objections to the factual circumstances referred to by the Attorney General in their explanations. You have a different view about the assessment of these factual circumstances.
The facts that will be demonstrated in the video evidence, or the fact that I crossed the demarcation line in November 2017, are all true.
Thank you. So you believe that the part where the witnesses' testimonies are shown, they do not correspond to the actual circumstances?
Not really. They are distorted.
The whole conversation between Savchenko and Lipetsk turns into a row over who spent longer on a hunger strike during their time in prison.
There were 106 days in total, but there were 83 continuous days and a dry hunger strike that lasted 6 days. I wanted you to see it. If I have to prove it again in Ukrainian prison, I will do so.
Nadiya, you don't need to scare me. I remember the feeling of death approaching. I felt it on the 31st day of my hunger strike. Only then I lost 23 kilograms and got 16 holes in my stomach, and you came out stuffed with Russian propaganda about the weapons at Euromaidan, about the money on Euromaidan.
No, I was at Euromaidan and I saw your crimes.
Well, I didn't interrupt you, so chew your pomegranate.
Finally, after not receiving answers to most of the questions, the members of the committee unanimously recommend to strip Savchenko of her parliamentary immunity and permit her arrest.
Thank you, anonymously.
In the voting room, Lipetsk repeats the essence of Savchenko's suspicion and demonstrates the 20-minute video. There are 2 officers in the 8th Special Forces Regiment on it, and they communicate with Savchenko and Ruban, discussing the plan to blow up Verkhovna Rada. According to the video, it was Ruban who in November 2017 offered the soldiers from the 8th Special Forces Regiment to commit a terror attack. Therefore, the regiment brought a whole array of weapons from the occupied territory, and now the soldiers are explained how to use these weapons in the video. Evidently, Ruban has a conversation with the major of the 8th Special Forces Regiment, Pavel Golov, who appears in the video as March, and his commander, Colonel Oleg Nechayev, who appears on the video as Lash. Ruban breaks down the future plan of a terrorist attack in 3 phases.
How I understand that the supply began, and we need to understand what you want from us. How do you see it?
I will need this to be done in Kyiv at least. There are 3 stages in total. The first stage should see all people leave, and I don't disclose this stage yet. All Kyiv citizens leave, and then the second stage.
Where do they go?
They leave their homes and go to the streets.
How will you make them do that?
We will make them. That's the first stage. On the second one, we tear down a beautiful building that is built on a damned place, and maybe the whole government too. And the third stage, we will either expel them, this large caliber, and his friends too. That is, if they don't flee themselves. They plan to have a second term.
Savchenko describes her own vision on how to eliminate the ruling elite of the state.
I see this situation differently. I see what Volodya offers. It's a revolution. But I offer you a coup, because it's necessary to physically remove them, all at once. That's one method. 1 day and from inside the building. Maybe it will take a couple of days, but 1 day will be the most productive one. In order to do this, we'll have to wait for up to a year. Then we will have to make them all flee. I'm less interested in the government quarter. I'm more interested in their houses. I think they will all start fleeing when they have nowhere to come back. Everybody will flee. Then, your task is to maintain the perimeter. I understand that the army's and the police's job is to prevent chaos. So the troops everywhere will receive which task? The one that will be given from above. But if there will be no above, no leadership, they will carry out our commands instead. In any case, if we don't make this breakthrough now, using any means, then it's not worth to stay alive at all. We are...
You shouldn't be afraid of chaos. We need the chaos. Chaos helps to control.
According to Lipetsk, the military were quick to understand what Ruban's and Savchenko's intentions are, so they went to the security service, who in turn helped record everything on video. The two officers from the 8th Regiment ask Savchenko who she thinks the three key figures in the government who need to be liquidated to make peace come are. The lawmaker, along with Ruban, named three people: Poroshenko, Turchinov, and Avakov. Savchenko then suggests to blow them up inside the building of the Verkhovna Rada. They just need to wait for the day when the president, deputies and ministers will all be inside the parliament's hall. This will happen when Poroshenko reads his report.
Okay, so I'll tell you this again. I need this to be done from inside. Yes, from inside, so that even the chandelier collapses onto the floor from the explosion. Then this quarter is no longer of our interest. It's only their houses that will interest us, so that they all start to freak out.
But where do we find so many people?
We need at least 300 and not shy ones.
We need one person inside. The rest should prevent, but not do anything. Do you want me to draw this for you again? Okay, give me a sheet of paper. This is the Presidium. This is the rostrum. These are rows of seats. All the secret services stand here, and the whole government sits here. This is the balcony. All the journalists are here to see how the president reads a report. This is where all the guests enter, but when the president speaks, even his assistants cannot enter. I already saw this myself. And that's where the diplomats enter from. Here, when the president reads a report, the diplomats are all here. We already made estimates. We need 8 grenades, F1, with a radius of damage of 200 meters each. There is a chandelier on the top of the dome, which will fall from the blast of the explosions. All this will collapse on camera. Should I explain to you why? We can destroy it all from here. It's a distance from which even I will manage to hit the target, trust me. We can enter through the journalist area. One person will do this in a matter of 19 seconds, but of course that person won't come out alive. The president guards are here and here.
This person who blows everyone up would be the lawmaker, Nadiya Savchenko herself. Savchenko herself admits that that person would not survive.
Well, and who will play the role of Jeanne d'Arc?
Jeanne d'Arc herself will.
Jeanne d'Arc herself will.
So what's the point then?
Just a beautiful bonfire.
Listen, heroes don't die. Heroes need to be dead. I didn't die there in Russian prison, so okay.
So you see yourself in this role?
Yes.
So what the hell do they need from Mayhem for?
But who else would be that person?
Okay, so if you die, who will replace you?
My sister Vera.
Nadiya Savchenko smiles watching this video. She says that she knew about being recorded and that what she was preparing wasn't a terror attack, but a political provocation. But other MPs don't believe her. They say that the video shocked them and now they will vote in favour of both, stripping her of her parliamentary immunity and permitting her justice and arrest. On Savchenko's way out of the council, she is stopped by an SBU investigator. He presents her the act of suspicion and suggests they drive to the investigative administration for her interrogation. The administration is located in the same building where the SBU pretrial detention center is. This is where the 2 Russian main intelligence directorate members were held in custody, the ones who Savchenko was exchanged for. Exactly 2 years ago today, the Russian court sentenced Savchenko to 22 years of imprisonment for allegedly killing 2 Russian journalists. And this is also the same detention center where Volodymyr Ruban is held now. Ruban is Savchenko's accomplice in her coup plans, according to the official investigation.
Please follow me to the main SBU department in Kyiv in order to draw up the detention protocol and apply measures to you that are provided by the legislation of Ukraine.
Are we going to walk?
We'll go by car.
What if we have a walk instead?
Okay, let's walk.
Yes, let's walk.
Let's go.
Let's go.
On March 23, the Shevchensky court chose a pre-trial measure for Savchenko. She will be held in custody for 59 days. The set of articles that incriminate her do not leave for any decision other than imprisonment. If Savchenko is proved to be guilty, she faces life imprisonment. Attorney General Lutsenko promised to finish this investigation in 4 to 5 months.
Handcuffs or no handcuffs?
No handcuffs.
Why so?
You are a woman.
Okay, so that doesn't stop you from accusing me of such terrible crimes, but it stops you from handcuffing me. I'm not yet sure if you're a professional, but you definitely are a gentleman.
So, of course, you know, there are a lot of rumors, there are a lot of things happening, but what is new in this story, that indeed there is a video recording where Savchenko was not just speaking in some negative way on the president, but they were speaking about the arms. And I also should say that we can show that Volodymyr Ruban, who is the negotiator during the prisoners' exchange, had been caught with arms. He possessed the arms. You know, I would just ask you to explain how seriously we see these stories, that it's not another political battle. It's really probably one of the rare cases when somebody of that, with that name and with that, I wouldn't say international even prominence, is accused of actually a coup.
I should say that I can't say that I believed General Prosecutor Mr. Lutsenko when he gave a speech in Verkhovna Rada in the Ukrainian parliament. It wasn't for me, it didn't sound for me as a truth. I did not believe that. But when I saw the video which you've mentioned, I have no choice other than believe that it did happen. I mean, that they did plan all these awful things, including the attack at the civil population, which is obviously awful.
From the first moment when it became evident that the question of stripping her the deputate immunity will be discussed in the Verkhovna Rada, there were doubts if she would be stripped of it. But as we saw how it was going in the meeting hall, nearly the constitutional majority of MPs voted for it. And firstly, of course, it's because her provocative behavior during this discussion and during this procedures in the Verkhovna Rada, but also here is a rather dangerous moment for the Ukrainian civil society, that after when we saw such loud accusations and without any doubts and without analyzing so much as it could be analyzed, MPs just voted for it. And as the General Prosecutor Lutsenko said, she's not the last. It's not the last case of this manner, and his words, they sound a little bit, you know, dangerous and worrying.
I would like just to, again, it seems like this story we need to explain and explain and explain. Show the actors of this story is the, and more or less a well-known person since 2014. There you can see him. He was arrested prior to Savchenko. For the first year, he was the one who, kind of without any official status, was communicating to DPR, DNR authorities and was in that regard, you know, somebody who helped to free some of the Ukrainian soldiers, while, for instance, also bringing the further evidence, we can show the amount of weapon he was carrying, and with which later had been used as an evidence. I should also say the interesting is the consequences that. First of all, there what we have the part of it. So really trying to explain the story. So there is a video, but at the same time, Savchenko, the idea was that first the Ukrainian soldiers who went to her and suggested her to make a coup, and she, later we found out that they were cooperating with the security service, and that makes it tricky. But she, in her defense, says that she, in fact, is more or less, it was a provocation, so she understood that it was SBU operation, so she played into that. So, and what is also by that regard, we don't know who is a mastermind. Where do we have the money? Because, you know, Savchenko isn't somebody who is rich, somebody who doesn't have any big political force behind you. You know, what you can say while dealing with prisoners exchange about the people around Volodymyr Ruban and the whole thing regarding those talks with DPR, DNR leaders.
Yes, of course, there is a line of defense from the side of Savchenko and her lawyers, but we have not only the talks, we have the weapons. Of course, Savchenko was not arrested together with Volodymyr Ruban at the moment when they were crossing the line, but however, we can see that at that video that they're not joking. But on the other side, it's very interesting to follow how Mr. Medvedchuk appears in all these talks. So first of all, after the arrest of Volodymyr Ruban, Viktor Medvedchuk was kind of promoted.
Whom I should say, Viktor Medvedchuk is a very close person to Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, a Ukrainian representative on the negotiations, with long connection to the Ukrainian government, very dubious politician in Ukraine, you know, the ones who might kind of denies the Ukrainian independence and sovereignty to some extent, who speaks about the better connection with Russia, and interesting enough, is really the interlocutor in the communication between Ukraine and Vladimir Putin himself.
Yes, exactly. And it looks like schizophrenics, because from one side, the president talks about Medvedchuk as our, I don't know, the main person in all this negotiation process. But on the other hand, when Vladimir Ruban just was arrested, he was like, you know, SBU was saying that this person is interlinked to Medvedchuk, as if Medvedchuk were, you know, a terrorist or something like this. So it's very strange. And of course, we'll see what will happen next, whether any other arrests will follow. But for me, as a human rights activist, the more important thing is how all this story will reflect on the issue of political prisoners and its perception from the side of civil society, from Ukrainian side of Ukrainian government, and of course from the side of international community. And I don't think that this story will improve our chance to get people back to Ukraine.
Trend today is that the people who are somehow very critical would be accused to be the Kremlin agents, you know, and also looking at this political environment, besides Mr. Medvedchuk, are there any people with that magnitude of influence who could be, you know, behind that, and to what extent we can at least speak about the connection of people like Savchenko to Russia, to DPR, to DNR?
Besides Medvedchuk, it's hard to say in the point of view of organizing such you know, coup or else. But for example, during giving his speech in Rada on Savchenko, General Prosecutor Lutsenko said that we will find this manipulator who is behind, and he didn't name Medvedchuk directly, but he meant him. But what about some political ties or some political background after Savchenko and her position? For example, it's very vivid that the only parliamentary fraction who didn't vote for her stripping of immunity, it was opposition bloc.
Maria, I would like to maybe ask to add more on, in particularly, Nadiya Savchenko herself, because she could be considered extravagant by a lot of people. What is very kind of difficult for us to perceive, because it's exactly 2 years when she was in Russian prison. There was a huge support to her. She was announcing the hunger strike. She does the same, and you kind of can't believe that she's again behind the bars. And, you know, it could be, of course, easily used by all the Russian propagandists, you know, look what happens. But really, what makes Savchenko special among all the other prisoners, because he was the most famous, he was the most welcomed, but later the society was very fast disillusioned by her, though she was also perceived like this Ukrainian nationalist radicals, which turned to be something totally different.
I think that this prominence, famous of Savchenko was interlinked with few things. First of all, she was a lady, and she was like a very bright figure at the background of all this Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And of course, she was arrested first in the ungovernment-controlled areas, and then passed to the Russian security forces or to Russian police. police. So it was kind of another proof that Russia is in Donbass and that Russian Federation is there with its army or its proxies and so on. So another thing, of course, is the political, I would say, probably political scores which were given to her by Ukrainian political parties, and in particular by Batkivshina and Yulia Tymoshenko herself. I think that there was a great resource which was invested in Savchenko's name and in her popularization. And of course, it's become like a story for the whole world. And I think that it played its role not only for Savchenko but also for Ukraine. And I don't think that the strategy of Ukraine, the strategy of defending its citizen was wrong. I think that everything was done correctly, and I don't think that we shouldn't do that at the moment. And I have to say that I communicated with Savchenko after she was released from Russia, and it was related to the issues of political prisoners, because they used to organize together with her sister Vera Savchenko some actions in defense of political prisoners. They were writing the letters to them. So it was also a shock for me to see this video because I was sure that, I didn't expect that. Some people who are involved probably in some negotiations between Ukrainian side and the so-called LPR and DPR, they would be, I think that might be the story for them which they will take into consideration before they go. So they will think twice, I think.
Those who are really unsatisfied with the corruption, with the elite, sooner or later they would kind of stage any kind of a coup. There would be a volunteer battalion, but it was always in the public discussion, something like to scare people. Sometimes you feel this sentiment, but it was just all about the words, and we never knew how supportive is society. Moreover, the official surveys and statistics says that very few people are supporting actually the violent or military coup, and this is really the first case when you really have a former military who kind of says that we are the military who should get rid of these people, and how you describe the reaction of the society?
The main message of Savchenko while she was defending in parliament in that day, in the third day, when the accusations of the Prosecutor General were in parliament, she said that her main aim was to make the authorities feel dangerous and feel some that they also may become victims. Of course, this message, some share of population received this message with a very high support, and it's really a little bit upsetting. But on the other hand, the authorities, they control the army and the National Guard. They control too much, and I don't think that the real perspective of some military coup may happen in the nearest year.
So what do you really think how this whole story would influence on the Ukrainian society, on the discussion on the conflict in the East, and on generally on the whole thing with the accusation on the being a Kremlin agent, being an agent? Because there were a lot of scary things, announced and published by the security service, but so far not everybody treated them seriously. Maria, what's your concern and what Anton says?
First of all, I don't see now that there is a kind of support from the side of society towards Nadiya Savchenko. I wasn't sure if Ukrainian society will support her or not, but as we see in the court, there were not so many people, and near the court there were no peaceful assemblies in her support, and after she was arrested as well. So probably Ukrainian society also did believe in all that story which was shown by Prosecutor's office.
Okay, thanks a lot. There was Anton Pechenkin, who is a political analyst, and Maria Tomak, who is the human rights activist for the Media Initiative for Human Rights. So the full story of what's happening around the arrest and accusation of the Ukrainian MP Nadiya Savchenko you can find on our webpage en.hromadske.ua. There are more details, more evidence, everything you would like to learn. But still, for us, there is a question: to what extent Nadiya Savchenko and Volodymyr Ruban are independent figures, as in any case they are rather small personalities with not that much money and political influence, or if to what extent the whole story is real, and also if there is any bigger mastermind behind the whole issue. So that would be probably the most important question, and we will follow. So please stay with us. Also go to our webpage in general, en.hromadske.ua, and on our social network at Hromadske, and as well search Hromadske International on Facebook. We are there 24/7. So go and find the full stories, which are on our webpage. Also sign up for our brand new newsletter if you would like to receive Hromadske International's weekly highlights. The sign-up box is on the upper right-hand side of the site, en.hromadske.ua. Also follow us on Twitter and Facebook, search Hromadske International. We are there 24/7 for you. Ukraine's largest independent English-language newspaper, the Kyiv Post, had been sold to Odessa multimillionaire and Syrian native Adnan Kivan. Kivan, who bought the paper for significantly more than $3.5 million asking price from billionaire Mohammed Zahur, will become Kyiv Post's third owner in the publication's 22 years. But the Syrian native, whose assets include a construction company and a TV station in Odessa, is a controversial figure in Ukraine, though not that much known. Kivan had faced accusations of involvement with both Russian-backed separatists in eastern Donbass as well as the Syrian war. But despite assurance from Kivan, the Kyiv Post now faces the question of whether it will be able to retain its editorial independence it's famous for. In the studio, we are joined by the paper's chief editor, Brian Warner, with whom we're pretty much sure that the editorial policy is independent. Though, Brian, the publication made an investigation on your new owner. We have this new issue. Really, what are your concerns? What you have more or less an editorial position to say before you start to work with Mr. Kivan?
Oh yeah, Natalia, thanks for having us here. We appreciate the support, the attention. Well, we're shocked. I mean, you can be 100% sure we've been editorially independent, and that goes all back to our founding in 1995 as Ukraine's English language paper. That's been the policy. Editorial independence means the journalists decide what is the news and how to present it. Obviously, that's a big concern for us. We were shocked. It happened well, we knew that Mohammed Zahur was looking to sell for some time. But when it happened very quickly. It happened during a single meeting that Zahur had with Mr. Kivan, and it happened at a price that I was, I'm rather impressed with the price, but there are a lot of questions about what he's going to do with the paper. I'm waiting to meet with him right now. So far, I've only had like one 5-minute conversation with him by telephone. He was ill. He told me he believes in democracy, strong against corruption. He wanted to see more coverage of the Syrian situation. He's from Syria. He's against Assad. But beyond that, we don't know what he's going to do with the paper.
Really? So can you really just say, so how fast did your team had learn about that? So it was like more or less very fast decision. What did Mr. Zahur said? And really, did Mr. Kivan call you, or you tried to reach him out?
I tried to reach out to him several times, and by phone and by text. He did call me back as I was on the street, and it happened. It was just at blazing speed, because I've been the acting CEO for some days now. I was given documents to sign to transfer the assets. That happened the same day. We learned who Mr. Kivan was. I never knew him, unfortunately, but after you start looking into it, everybody in Odessa knows him. He's one of the wealthiest business people in Ukraine. As I understand it, he has other media assets, and he's trying to increase his investments in Kyiv. So I think I'm told he wants a stronger Kyiv presence, and he also has had some troubles with rumors and allegations and investigations of him. So I think he also sees, like many owners, as the media as a defense mechanism. In the best of all worlds, he will invest in the Kyiv Post. He will allow us to retain our strong and independent voice. Of course, we're concerned, obviously, because the Kyiv Post has been a target for politicians throughout its history, because we've taken very honest and critical stands against corruption and so forth. So we've been a target for elimination, shall we say, from the media scene for quite some time. And, we're only a year before the election. So obviously there's some political concerns here, waiting to hear from the owner himself.
What have you learned about Mr. Kyiv during this time? Yes, he's known in Odessa, but he's more or less not known outside of this big southern town. Any politicians is blamed to be dubious in Ukraine, because that's how the business is done. So really, what are the concerns? What are the weak, because often the weak points of the owner later become the weak points for the media company.
Well, we know that he's been, he's been very successful in construction. We know that, and for 2 decades. We also know, something about the media, the TV station that he has there. We also know he has ties to politicians. That by itself is not a bad thing. I mean, business people need ties to politicians.
Which politicians? We knew about his connection to Mr. Trukhanov,
right,
who was the Odessa mayor and then later accused to have a Russian citizenship, and at the beginning being also close to the President Poroshenko.
Yes, we've heard all those same things. We've heard he was close to Trukhanov, the mayor, that they did deals together, that they got approvals. We heard he's close to Sergei Kivalov, the notorious
Remind
MP,
about this person.
Opposition bloc, who is, long, probably the most famous suspect in rigging, accused of rigging the election in 2004 that triggered the Orange Revolution. We know that, we hear that Channel 7 is pro-Poroshenko. We hear he likes Tymoshenko. But, what's concerning to us is that, business people in this country, because of the connection between business and politics, they do have connections. What we're interested in is not that whether he has connections or is for somebody or against somebody, but actually will allow us to write the news as we see it, honestly, without fear or favor, without any partisan bias, just the way the journalists see the story. The value comes not from our computers or our equipment, it comes from the people, the reputation, the asset, and our readers will not accept a political PR rag, or they will not accept Jinza, they will not accept any of these compromises on editorial independence that I think other stations have made.
What are the safeguards for your team, and where are you looking? What would you read as kind of a, you still haven't talked to Mr. Kyiv about the paper,
right,
about the editorial policy of the paper, but really, what would be for you, don'ts and does? What would be? How would you build the strategy?
Well, ultimately, it's up to the advertisers, the subscribers, and readers to defend us. But we'll know very soon whether he wants an independent newspaper or he doesn't want an independent newspaper, very quickly. And there's nothing we can really do. It is his newspaper. We built this brand, and we built the reputation, and we enjoy high levels of trust. We consider it sacred, a sacred trust to the public. We hope he does as well.
High-level politicians about the media situation in Ukraine and to raise all our concern. Hromadske has also issues with the pressure from the politicians, and we always stand by our standards and values. And I know that the president himself is extremely critical of Kyiv Post. He doesn't, in particularly accusing the paper of kind of being panicking when it's not yet, when it's too early to panic, of overdoing the level of repression which is happening here, of sometimes running the, kind of portraying Ukraine in more black colors than white, especially knowing that Ukraine is struggling for the support of the investors. But really, what would you say on that? What would you say on the people who say that sometimes Kyiv Post is really maybe a bit overdoing the threats?
Well, I don't think we're overdoing the threats at all. And what we do, in a democracy, the media's role is to hold those into power accountable. And what we do out of love for Ukraine, not out of hate. We want this to be a better country. We live in it, we work in it. Most of the staff are Ukrainian, but the record is clear. I mean, there's been no rule of law. There's been no significant improvement in the investment climate. There have been no prosecutions or convictions of anybody for high-level corruption. Looks like a lot of deals with oligarchs have been made, which goes counter to the de-oligarchization. A lot of people's hopes and dreams have been dashed, and they blame Poroshenko for the power. If he doesn't recognize that, listen, most Ukrainians don't read the Kyiv Post. They do not, but they're not supporting Poroshenko because they understand what's going on. They understand the disappointment in his record. So if anybody thinks that getting rid of, and by the way, representatives of Poroshenko did try to buy us. We have a long history of this. Kurchenko, Yanukovych's guy, attempted to buy us. Firtash attempted to buy us. Firtash sued us for libel. Yanukovych's agricultural minister got me fired the first time for refusing to censor a story. So we have a long history, going back to Kuchma time and the Melnichenko tapes, of irritating politicians. Why? Because we're telling the truth as we see it. Now, whether we're right or wrong, whether we make mistakes or not, that's, we're very accurate. I think we're very fair. But sometimes we can be harsh, but our mistakes are honest mistakes. And I have to tell you, we don't all do politics. We do business. We do entertainment. We cover the war. We've covered the revolution. So we're here. We're part of the community. The Kyiv Post is not going to become the Prague Post or the Washington Post. We're going to stay. And if we're going to stay as independent. And if we're not, I know that...
and if not?
If not, I know that there is a demand and a market for independent journalism, and we will, we'll have to find a new place where we can practice that.
Thank you. Brian Booner, and editor-in-chief of Just Sold Kyiv Post. The Ukrainian media market is heavily dominated by oligarch-owned media, while independent outlets are often accused of being counterproductive to reforms when they become critical of the government. The murder of Pavel Sheremet in summer of 2016 has still not been investigated, and zero progress had been made on the case. This is just one of many uninvestigated crimes against journalists. Meanwhile, at least 3 journalists are being detained by Russia. Roman Sushchenko, arrested in Moscow, Mykola Semena is in occupied Crimea, and Stanislav Aseyev held in separatist-controlled Donetsk. Ukraine had become at the same time the target for Russian fake news. This is exactly the place where Russian information warfare is constantly practiced. Yet neither Russian propaganda nor the war against Ukraine can be used as an excuse to put pressure on the country's media. Here, even the OSCE had been criticized for not differentiating between Ukrainian government attempts to stop disinformation and Russian propaganda. So we spoke with Arlem Desir, OSCE representative for freedom of media, about how to deal with propaganda and fake news without sacrificing freedom of press. Met a journalist, different media organization. So what are your impressions? What are the main issues at this moment in Ukraine to raise for somebody who take care about the freedom of speech representing OSCE?
Well, I think Ukraine is a country where freedom of the speech is respected. There's a lot of diverse media outlets, and I think that the Ukrainian people are very much attached to the development of the free media in the country. Nevertheless, I've met a lot of your colleagues and of journalists association, and we are working permanently with watchdogs and advocacy group for media freedom, and we are worrying about certain problems which remains regarding safety of journalists, of course because of impunity. After the crimes against several Ukrainian journalists, I think about the crime against Pavel Sheremet, and the perpetrators and the mastermind have still not been brought to justice. There is also several incidents, and I think there is no minor incident when it's about safety of journalists, and it's very important that the judiciary, the law enforcement, the government, of course, put in place all the necessary policy to ensure that any threats, any attacks against a journalist will be investigated. This is a concern that we have everywhere in the OSCE region.
We currently have there are more, 3 journalists who are detained. We can speak about Roman Sushchenko in Moscow, about Mykola Semena in Crimea, who is under criminal procedure, and Stanislav Aseyev in a way worse situation in Donetsk. And what the public sees, that even though Russia is a member of OSCE, currently there is very little international community can do really to have an impact. What you would say to those that, you know...
Yes, of course, this is a very important issues that we have raised during this meeting here in Kiev, and that I've raised when I paid an official visit to Russia last year. Roman Sushchenko was a well-known journalist. He was working from Paris, and he has been arrested and is still detained in Russia. This is not an acceptable situation, and I recall that OSCE participating states have took commitments to encourage the free flow of information, to facilitate the work of journalists from other participating states, to give accreditation, and not to arrest journalists coming from another participating state. Stanislav Aseyev was a blogger working in Donetsk. He has been arrested by the separatists outside of any kind of legal procedure, and we have asked for his release since the beginning. And Mykola Semena is now under house arrest in Crimea, and we ask that he can be able to come to Ukraine and to Kiev freely, and it's not acceptable that he has been condemned and even forbidden to exercise his work of journalist. Those are also issues that we have raised in the context of a dialogue between National Union of Journalists of Ukraine and the Union of Journalists of Russia, and there was several common appeal and public statement to ask for the release of Stanislav Aseyev.
Well, the Ukrainian government is always very disappointed when the international organizations are criticizing them for the limitation of the work of some of the Russian government channels or the Russian social networks and the other things. And somehow those people who support those bans always says, but the France is looking at how to deal with the fake news, the Google should deal with fake news. For instance, the discussion on the foreign agencies taking place on the US, and the Brits are speaking about the RT. So how would you answer on that the Western governments are also trying to do something with stopping the fake news, but in case of Ukraine, there would be always some kind of the criticism that Ukraine is putting a pressure on the media?
Yes, that's an international discussion, and in all countries today there is an attempt to legislate or to look at the ways to stop fake news or disinformation or propaganda. There has been some legislation also which aim at fighting against hate speech, for example, racism, anti-Semitism, terrorist propaganda. And it's a very difficult issue because of the special dimension of social media, where you can have thousands or millions of unlawful content or in a way call for violence, which are disseminated sometimes by extremist groups, sometimes by other states which try to meddle in the situation of their neighbor, of other country. But I think that we must be very attentive on the fact that first, this wording, fake news, can recover very different kind of situation. Of course, there could be also a lot of people who just put silly things on internet which are not real information. Here, I think that the real and good answer is to promote quality of information, professional journalism, to debunk fake news, to develop also media literacy, to help people to understand that they cannot take for granted all kind of news which are on internet or on Facebook or on Twitter. A second different thing is the attempt sometimes by certain states to intentionally give disinformation to try to create trouble in another country. And sometimes there has always also been the use of factory trolls, for example, and this has to be investigated very precisely. And I think that transparency here is important. To know, for example, who is buying advertisement on Facebook, especially in electoral campaign, and that's a very intense debate now in the United States, where there is, you know, this investigation on what happens during the previous presidential campaign. And there is also the fight against hate speech. There is legislation which exists, and there is international law which says that call for violence or hatred against people because of their origin, their religion, their race, for example, can be forbidden. That could be legitimate limits to freedom of expression. It was already existing for printed press. Now it can be applied to internet, but we must take care that it will not be done by algorithm which will not only block and take down unlawful content, but which could also block the access to some critical voices or independent media outlets. And I'm very careful about the way some government will try to impose to social media, to internet intermediaries, more and more blockade, saying that they just fight against fake news, against propaganda or against hate speech, but in fact trying to stifle, to restrain the space for free media and for criticism. And it's very important to find the good balance, and that's also the discussion now in European countries, for example in Germany, in France, also in the United States, to look at the way you can impose some kinds of regulation to the internet social media, but protect the freedom of expression and the diversity of opinion. And I think for Ukraine also this will be a key issue. We are engaged in a discussion with the government about this issue of hate speech. We have provided legal advice about the international standards and the good practices which exist in other countries. And I think that it will be of utmost importance for Ukraine, even if I understand that the country is in a very difficult situation, facing difficult challenges linked to the conflict, linked to the annexation of Crimea, to the conflict in the eastern part of Ukraine, but to protect freedom of expression and to ensure that any legislation will not put at risk the development of free media, even if, of course, governments sometimes are upset by free media, because the work of journalists and the work of media is to criticize, is to develop critical thinking. But that's the nobility of democracy, and that's also how the public debate can progress in a country.
In what has been described as a landslide victory, President Vladimir Putin has secured another 6 years as Russia's leader. The predetermined elections has drawn criticism from Europe and West, although of course there was no surprise. So why does it matter? Is there any significance, and what can we learn? In Moscow, I had a chance to talk to Mikhail Zygar, a famous Russian political journalist and the author of the All the Kremlin's Men book. What also interesting, Zigor is a close acquaintance of the opposition candidates Ksenia Sobchak, who officially received 1.7% of the votes, and anti-corruption activist Alexei Navalny. Alexei Navalny was banned from running in the elections. Both opposition politicians have different views on how they should act. Navalny suggested boycotting the elections, and Sobchak wants to use the system to change the situation for the better. Are any of the strategies at least a bit efficient, and what should expect next? Watch our discussion.
Speaking of the presidential elections, yes, there was a campaign, a struggle for turnout. Some kind of struggle was against the elections boycott, which was announced by Alexei Navalny. Do you think this campaign can affect something?
It seems to me that for a long time now we don't have a feeling that these presidential elections are real and that this is something important. It's been several years now that Russia doesn't have any political process. During the last parliamentary elections, 2 years ago, there was a minimal turnout, a record for Russia. Nobody came to vote because no one was running. For a long time, we do not have politics which people would take seriously. There are a lot of people in the country who understand that they have to do something, strive for something, achieve some result in various ways in business, through some kind of social mechanisms. Some of them even work sometimes efficiently, but not a single person has the slightest illusion or delusion that something can be achieved with the help of politics. One famous politician who ran for the regional deputy position was killed in front of the Kremlin. Another politician who took second place in the mayoral election in Moscow was sentenced to a conditional term and was not put in prison. Instead, his brother was. And there are actually more examples like these. It's millions of them throughout the country. It was enough for many people to understand that questions are not solved through politics. This is some kind of taboo zone. Everybody understands that a large number of people in Russia, the most educated, the most valuable labor resources of this country, are not the people who support Putin. This is a paradox with which, in part, the authorities have to put up with, although maybe at some point they will be happy to make sure that all these people have left the country.
Ksenia Sobchak's campaign in this story, if opposition politicians are not running, how can it be characterized? Yes, she scored about 2% and seems to be saying that the main thing is participation. But was it just a performance or an attempt to do something?
From the very beginning, I was against her participation in this and tried to dissuade her. It doesn't matter how sincere Sobchak is in her plans, but of course it is impossible to register as a candidate without some kind of silent or not silent consent of the Kremlin, the presidential administration. Everybody understands this. You cannot be a project of the Kremlin, but the question is, who is using whom? Although the score seems to be in their favour, there is no feeling that she used them for much, and her 3 months' participation in the election campaign led to the opening of the eyes of the Russian voters, and, thanks to her participation in the talk show, they heard a new agenda. I sincerely believe that she tried to show an example, that here she is, a person who's not afraid. But her example did not inspire anyone. Everyone decided that she is only participating because she was Ksenia Sobchak, and not because people can engage in politics now. For me, this is a very personal and unpleasant story, because it's not about values or strategy. I do not really understand the boycotting, the idea that someone legitimizes something and someone's participation becomes Putin's legitimization seems ridiculous to me. The last elections in our country took place on September 24, 2011, and occurred in the head of Dmitry Medvedev when he chose Vladimir Putin as the next president of Russia. I think that after 2014, there is little which is amusing happening in Russian foreign and domestic politics. 2014 put an end to the amusing, and we have not changed radically since. There is an important atmospheric difference between what is happening in Russia and what is happening in Ukraine. In Russia, there is a feeling in terms of the crisis in relations with Ukraine that everything is over, that there was 2014 when there was scary, bad, terrible war. Everyone was worried. Someone was angry, someone wasn't, someone was waiting for war to come to every house. Today in Russia, there is a feeling that all of that is over. But in Kyiv, on the contrary, everything is actively going on.
All these expulsions of British diplomats, accusations by Boris Johnson, what do you think about that? How far Russia is entering a new stage of the Cold War? How serious is the whole story with the poisoning of Skripal?
It seems to me that everything is rather bad. Everyone underestimates how far the situation has come, and there is no chance that there will be an improvement. There are many signs that there will be a degradation. Mainly, there is no motivation to improve relations with Russia. I got a feeling that no one needs Russia in the way it looks today. Putin's idea that we should be respected because we're still like the Soviet Union does not find a response. Because after all, Russia is not the Soviet Union. Yes, there are rockets, but this is not the same thing.
While reporting from Russia, Hromadske team had also traveled to another place of interest for Ukrainians, the town of Lipetsk. It's where the confectionery factory Ruban, owned by the Ukrainian president and businessman, is based. There was huge criticism that the factory of the Ukrainian leader pays taxes in the country Ukraine is at war with. In the end, the Russian state arrested the accounts of the enterprise, accusing it of fraud, while Poroshenko finally, last year, 2017, closed the factory. 700 people lost their jobs in the result. The factory used to be the best employee in the Russian town in terms of salaries and conditions. So watch our report from Russian factory in Lipetsk, a rare place everybody knows about but few people had seen.
I've been at Ruban since 2010. I like the company, I like the conditions, and I still think it's a shame that the factory closed.
The Russian factory in Lipetsk was in operation for 13 years. It was one of the biggest enterprises in the city. The factory made caramel candy that was sold not only in Russia, but abroad as well. In the spring of 2017, the investigative committee of Russia seized the factory's accounts as part of a fraud case. In the summer of the same year, the operation was suspended. Close to 700 workers were made redundant. Oh, how cold is it in here?
Well, yes, it's even colder than outside.
There's no heat in here, right?
There's no heating, it's all drained. Even when I first arrived, it took some time to get to grips with. None of the equipment here is Russian, it's German equipment. Therefore, it's very easy to work with. It worked well, reliably. As someone who used all of it, I was happy.
And do you like Russian candy?
I like the candy on the whole. I was sometimes able to treat myself. The damp on the equipment, the sugar that's left after the production, it gradually settles on the floor. Therefore, it leaves the floor sugary.
Like an ice rink. This is also caramel, right?
Yes, this is all one line. There are a few different types of candy, but all one shape.
You say that the factory has stopped operations temporarily.
That's what the management said. Where did we get that information from? From the management. The power engineer said, so many of our production units are closing, we're suspending operation. We closed and suspended everything.
And how did you take it?
Badly, of course.
Were you expecting this to happen?
Of course there were fears that this would happen. We expected more, that everything would be all right. I'm from Ukraine. I want everything to be good between our countries. My parents, brothers, sisters are there.
How come you decided to leave Ukraine?
It was a small town. There weren't many businesses. The Soviet Union collapsed then, and where was there to work? I studied at Slavyansk Power Engineering College.
Is it true when they say that the wage violations were higher?
Not that much, but a little bit, to maintain the level of work, probably to keep people in their place. A person can earn a living. No one can settle down without a job.
And what is it like for you now?
I'm on the payroll, on the same rate for someone with my specialty. I stayed on as an electrician, to keep the lights and working condition, etc. This is where the technical service sat, the maintenance and repair team, the dosage workers, the stock rooms. I'm going to try and turn something on here if I can. The control panel is switched off here. Shall we go into the shower room?
Oh, go on then.
The men's. They're standard showers, but it's the only place where I've seen motion-sensitive toilets. Put it this way, we hope that this would bypass us and that we would work as we have in the past, that relations would remain purely business. The president is the president, work is work, business is business, therefore we hoped until the last minute that everything would be okay. Of course I'm less familiar with this area. What we can see there is where they tried to build a huge workshop. This is a 7-story building, and this is the production part. It's not completed. Everything will work out all at once. Maybe something will change for us in this country, as you say, for the better. Maybe not straight away, not in the first 5 years, maybe not even in 10. I've already started to think that far ahead in the future.
What do you think about Petro Poroshenko?
As a manager, he's someone who has built this enterprise, and you could say he has supported this at a European level. I have respect for him. He's good. I haven't thought about him as a president. I don't even vote in my own country. Why would I think about another?
Thank you from the entire team of Hromadske International for watching this Sunday show. We are here to explain Ukraine and Eastern Europe for you. Also, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Go to our webpage en.hromadske.ua. We are there for you. There is a full version of our reports and interviews and when more. And for now, goodbye.